Hey. I am so excited to be able to be on with you as we're to episode 2 of Heal Well. Come on, in this Built Women Conversation podcast, talking about wholeness after divorce. Come on, I'm so excited to be on here with you guys. Again, my name is Alicia J. Kemper. I'm the founder of Voice Impact LLC, where our focus is the power of prayer, the power of purpose, and the ability to pursue after the things that God has called us to do. And so I'm so excited to be able to have this conversation with you. If you did not get a chance to see the last episode, as we are talking about healing well and having wholeness after divorce, we talked a little bit about why it can be so hard and just even learning the power of honesty. And so if you didn't get to see that episode, you can just go right on to the YouTube channel, click on the podcast, and you are able to listen to episode 1. But as we are now in episode 2, talking about wholeness after divorce, we are talking about the power of forgiveness and learning to release the blame. Come on, learning to release blame. And I know, if you have been a believer for any amount of time in anybody's church, forgiveness is something that is preached on often, but I don't think that we can honestly even say it enough, the power of true forgiveness. In the Bible, the disciples, that someone approached Jesus and asked him and said to him, how many times should we forgive? And God's word to the disciples was 70 times 7. And that was equated to one person. That is a lot of forgiveness, right? 70 times 7, one person forgiving them, right? And so I believe the message that Christ was, or Jesus was revealing to us, was to get us to understand that there was no limitation on forgiveness. He reminds us that if the Father can be so faithful in forgiving us, that there's a need for us as well to be willing to forgive others. And I know when you're talking about attaching forgiveness to the topic and the conversation of like divorce and knowing that you have experienced things like that, it can be hard. I can literally hear you guys on my head like, Alicia, you have no idea what they did. And I get it. Like, I have been in the position of all kind of manner of evil done. But I'd love to be honest with you and say that I have not been a perfect person myself. I can tell you that as much as I have been someone's victim, someone has actually been my victim. And that's the truth. Whether intentional or unintentional, I have done things to hurt other people. And I'm grateful every day for God's forgiveness. And I'm grateful for theirs. And so I believe that one of the things that is important for us as we're stepping a little bit deeper in this conversation on wholeness after divorce is our willingness to walk in forgiveness. Listen to me, it is necessary. Forgiveness, as you have heard, and even if you haven't, forgiveness is not about the other person. It really isn't. Forgiveness is really about you. The Bible always tells us about the root of bitterness and what it can do. And when we live in a place where we are unwilling to forgive, not only do we open up ourselves to not receive the forgiveness that we need from the Father ourselves for the things that we have done, the mistakes that we have made, but we also open up our hearts, or we lock down our hearts, and we block our hearts from having the ability to forgive. Because one of the most important components in forgiveness, when we're talking about wholeness after divorce, is the ability to release, the ability to let go. So when we're trying to hold on to the trauma, when we're trying to hold on to the pain that we feel should be justified, that there should be some form of cost that they should pay for what they have done, we are ultimately holding on to them. And so when you're talking about now going through a divorce, knowing like you've signed that paper, right? That relationship is over. When you don't forgive, you have divorced on paper, but you have not divorced it. You haven't divorced in you. Like, you're not divorced. Like, you're still connected to him. A part of forgiveness gives us the ability to break the soul tie that is connected. Because remember, that's a part of what we talked about in last episode of why it's so hard to let go, because it is a tie that causes you to be bound to that person. And so forgiveness and releasing the blame allows you to heal and let that person go, right? It allows you to heal and let that person go. It's necessary. You have to heal. But if forgiveness is a major part of it. Now, there are 2 components to forgiveness, y'all. So there is the component of forgiveness where you're forgiving them, right? You're forgiving them for whatever they did, intentional or unintentional, right? Whatever it is, even if they don't perceive that they did anything wrong, right? Sometimes we are forgiving them even for our own unmet needs, our own untold needs, disappoint things we're disappointed about that they didn't even know was an expectation of them. Like we're forgiving from that standpoint. But then the other side of forgiveness is a willingness to forgive yourself. So let me give y'all a great example of something that, I shared this in the last episode about just 2 years of, I didn't even want to face that I still loved my ex-husband, like as if love just goes away just because you're like in a divorce. But I tried to act like that. And then when the Lord really dealt with my heart, but one of the things as I began to heal that I had to take responsibility for was realizing for me, I had made church my place to run to. And I want to explain what I mean by that, because God should be the place that we run to. God, the Bible calls him our the Bible declares that God is our hiding place, that he is a safe place for us. But the problem for me was that I began to do many things, and I was at a lot of stuff at church not to face the conflict that was going on in my home. And see, that's a little bit different. I wasn't running to the church because God was a hiding place or he was safety for me. I was running from my problems. And so there were things that me and my ex-husband could have easily solved by way of a conversation. There were things that maybe, I don't know. I really don't know if things would have necessarily gotten in the direction that they did. But one of the things that I had to accept responsibility for, least that blame off of him, was my struggle with conflict. And a part of the struggle with conflict was because I wasn't completely whole. That's the reason why when you listen to what Adam said in Genesis 2, he reminds us that two people come together to become one. That's whole, like two whole people. And a lot of times we're not taught that. And we believe that marriage can solve our brokenness. And I said this before, but I'm going to say it again. Identity, when you come into marriage, there is identity that is shaped through your husband for the wife, right? The kind of wife that you'll be in your home, the kind of wife, like God allows him to be a place of freedom for you, to where you can develop to be that wife that you need to be to him, right? That mother to your children. But the reality is he is never designed to give you identity as a woman. And see, the identity of a woman encompasses your whole life. His job is there to help shape that identity as a wife, to give you the freedom to be the wife that you are called to be, to develop into that wife that you are called to be. But see, the problem for me when I came into marriage was there wasn't a whole woman there. And so when I came out of my divorce, there was so many identity issues that were there. Right. And what actually happened was the more brokenness that I experienced in my marriage, the more brokenness that happened in my life as a woman. But it wasn't his fault. I blamed him. I pointed the finger. But the reality was there was a severe amount of rejection and insecurity that rested in my life. And so I turned around and I ran to the church when we had conflict. I ran to do a bunch of stuff when we had conflict because it was hard for me. Like I wanted him to hear me. I wanted him to hear me say that I want to be loved more. I wanted to hear him say, I want him to hear me say about the things I needed. But then as a man, when he would express to me the things that he needed, it was so hard for me to hear it. Because instead of recognizing that as much as he needs, I need the liberty, for the reign and the freedom to become the wife that he needs. He needed the same reign and freedom to be the husband that I needed. And I needed to give him that liberty and that respect to be that husband. But my insecurity always accepted his constructive criticism as rejection. And so instead of facing those hard things, I was running from them. And so that was something I had to accept, right? I had to accept it. And that's the reason why forgiveness is important, because I will tell you that revelation would have meant nothing if I didn't forgive him. Because forgiveness does something in our heart where we can release the blame, like we can get out of the blame game. Like if you hadn't have did this, then maybe we would have. When we forget that there is not just one person in the marriage, there is two. And it's hard. I get it, because some of you may be saying, like, I experienced some abuse and all of that. And I'm not saying that you warranted abuse, but if I want to be honest with you, and I think about the emotional abuse and the verbal abuse that I went through, the reality is there were so many opportunities for me to stand up. There were so many things that he displayed I could have walked away from, but I didn't. I didn't. So I had to take responsibility even in acknowledging that I allowed my voice to be muted. I allowed myself to be silenced and shut down. And I know that's hard, but when we can take responsibility, that is the first step of us having the ability to actually transform. When every problem is somebody else, when the responsibility is always resting on someone else, then we take no responsibility and we remain the same. We stand in the way and we hinder our ability to grow. Come on, I want you to remember today that there are different sights that we have. We have foresight. The Lord allows us to be able to a thing, ahead of time. But just like we have foresight, right? We have nearsight. So we have the ability often around about us, when our eyes are open and we allow the Holy Spirit to flow through us, He will give us insight on even what is going on around us. So we have foresight, we have insight, but then we also have hindsight. And the reality is that hindsight is just as powerful. We would love to be able to learn every lesson while we're in it. We would love to know everything before we get to it. But there are some lessons that are learned in foresight. Because oftentimes, once the mistake, it teaches us a lesson that we don't repeat. But can I tell you today that if you don't start with forgiveness, if you don't start with releasing the blame, come on, I'm telling you, like, you will keep repeating that cycle. Because we have to take responsibility where responsibility is. And I'm telling you today, I know this is rough. I know this is rough because sometimes in the midst of our pain, we perpetuate a victim mentality. But what I'm trying to minister to you today, woman of God, dear woman, you are not a victim. Do you understand me? It doesn't matter what has happened to you. You are not a statistic. In this moment, you have the ability to forgive and release him and to release the blame. And not only that, you have the ability to forgive yourself. Because just like I said, I had to forgive myself. When I began to see some of the parts that I played in the demise of our marriage, it was a lot. But the reality is that because forgiveness led me, right? Because my prayer life led me, it helped me to not live in condemnation and shame, to not live in guilt. I'm not saying it didn't show up, but because it was stewarded in the place of prayer and it was stewarded through the principle of forgiveness, like giving myself grace to forgive, that it kept me from staying stuck in places. Because grief is real after divorce. And I believe that grief is real in many circumstances, but grief is real after divorce because remember what I already spoke about. Like, think about this from that standpoint. You are grieving the body that once slept next to you. You are grieving the body that once sat on the couch with you. You're grieving the fact that you had the ability that even if things wasn't always good, there was another adult that was in that home with you. You're grieving the conversation. You're grieving the sex, the intimacy that came with it. You're grieving the partnership, the union that you were once in. Grief is real after divorce. But the reality is that if you will not forgive, and if you are unwilling to release the blame and stop pointing the finger and choose to decide that I won't be a victim of my circumstance, but I will choose to use hindsight as a lesson, you will not be able to move on and heal well. I had to learn this lesson, guys. And I'm giving you this lesson knowing that for at least 2 years after my divorce, I was not living this out. It was hard because there were so many things he was still saying. There were so many things he was still doing, and it angered me. And so though I didn't pour it out on the people around me, inwardly, I just felt like it wasn't fair. Until one day the Lord had to really minister to me, and he literally dealt with me. God dealt with me. And God reminded me of all the men forgiven me. He reminded me that my dysfunctional cycle didn't start with my ex-husband. He reminded me of all the times, the things that I actually deserved to get, but the Lord covered and protected me. Man, that moment I wept before the Lord. And I realized that just as much as I am with fault, so was he. And even though there were some things that he did that I mean, I didn't get it. I didn't understand. Like, I didn't deserve it. The reality is in that moment, I realized how much I really didn't deserve what my Savior did. And I didn't deserve the forgiveness and the unending love of God that is always there. And it broke my heart. And I realized I needed to let go. I realized I needed to release that anger. And I'm going to tell you another reason why forgiveness is important, because you could be on this broadcast with me and we're talking about wholeness after divorce, and you could be in one or two states. You could be a person that went from being married to divorced, and you didn't have kids with that person, but the people around you are being exposed to your bitterness, right? Your perspective on love is negative. It is no one wants to be around you because you're it is just every time they get on the phone with you, it's just pouring out of you. You're just complaining. You're just angry. You're just mad. It's a lot. Or you could be that person, that woman that is coming out of a marriage, you're dealing with divorce, and you are now a mother. You're a single mother of children. And you need to forgive. That bitterness does not pour out on your children. You know, one of the things that sometimes we don't think about is the reality is that our children are innocent bystanders of divorce. They really are. The reality is they never asked to come into the world. They never asked to be included in anything that had anything to do with your life and your ex-husband. So at the end of the day, when it goes awry and you're now walking through divorce, they should not be dragged in the middle of that. You got to learn to forgive, because at the end of the day, that's their father. And even if you didn't have those kids with them, but to some point he was a father figure in your life, how dare we try to distort their perception of their father? Because the reality is, contrary to popular opinion, God made you to be a woman. And the reality is you can only fulfill one role, and that is mother. So why distort the perception of their father? Why give a hard time for them? Let's just say they are not present. Let's just say that they're not, there's things that they're doing that they shouldn't be doing. Allow the facts to tell the story. Because that was one of the first things the Lord said to me when I came out of my divorce. He said, you will shut your mouth. And there were many things. Guys, I'm telling y'all, years later, maybe about 4 or 5 years later, I'm in the car with my kids and we're laughing and talking about some things or whatever. And all out of the blue, my kids started telling me all of this stuff that when their father was very present in their life, that he was saying up and he was talking about. And man, it took everything in me not to just break down in tears in front of them, because it broke my heart that my kids were young and these things were being said to them. Very vulgar and ugly things about me, because I chose to walk away from his ways and his behavior. And just dogged me out. And I remember saying to my kids, like, man, why didn't y'all tell me about it? They were like, well, we knew it wasn't true. And my kids end up saying, like, at the end of the day, like, it's been proven. It's like the life that you lived before us has always let us know that what dad was saying wasn't true. That the woman that you were proven by your consistency and being there with us and your behavior. Like, you've never, did all of this stuff that he would say that, oh, you're doing this, or we don't know, and different things like that. But man, when I walked away from that car and went in my room, I wept. I weep that was even a burden my kids was carrying, and that was something that was put on to them by one of their parents. Man, that's crazy. We should never do that. That's the reason why we have to learn to forgive and release people. Forgive and let them go. Because our children are innocent, and there is already trauma that they have to experience when you're talking about going through the divorce. The last thing they need is a parent in that situation putting burdens on them about the other parent. That's mommy and daddy. And what we don't realize is we begin to develop something in our kids that messes with their ability as they become adults to see that woman or that man the way that they should. all because of the lies we told them when they were younger. Let's not do that. Ladies, I don't care if you are in that position. I pray that you would hear me today. I'm not telling you that it's easy. I walked through this where God told me, close your mouth. You will not reciprocate his behavior. And it was hard. That's why it was so hard for those 2 years. The lies to be dogged out. And to this day, you're talking about it is what, 11, 12 years later. And there are still people that believe the lies. There are still people that got stuff said. There are still people that have counted me out and still got things to say about me, all behind the lies and the things that he said and did. But what I realized was my job was to make peace with who God called me to be. And my job was to make peace with the choice that I made. I made a choice to walk away. I made a choice that I would much rather be in a single parent home and my children are healthy and they know that they're loved and what they see reflects what God declares we should be, rather than being in a two-parent home and seeing abuse and all kind of crazy behavior. So I made my choice, not knowing whether or not he would be present. But whether present or not present, my lips did not touch him. And I mean, if my kids came on this broadcast right now to you guys, they would tell you, I don't do that. And it really hurts my heart when I hear about women that, won't let go. They did some things. They're trying to be a father in the life of their children. But because of some of the things that happened in the marriage that you were in or the relationship that, you're in with them, you're making the kids pay. Don't make your kids pay. They're innocent. And it's already traumatic when you're splitting up. It's already traumatic when you're going through a divorce. Don't make it harder. Choose to forgive and let go. If you're walking away, if they walked away, it's over. The best thing that you can do is forgive and release the blame. What can you learn from it? I said this to someone one day, and I'll say this to you guys. And then, and this is what I said to them. I said to them that I have come to learn that there is no such thing as regrets. But I realize that every situation in my life is a lesson. And I have found that in everything, there is something for me to learn. My prayer today is that you will realize that in everything, there's a lesson for you to learn. What can you learn? What can you learn? But I'm telling you that you cannot approach that mindset if you are still choosing to hold on to unforgiveness. And then even beyond unforgiveness, remember what I said, that the extra part of the component of forgiveness is releasing the blame. And that's whether that's the blame on the ex-husband or if that's the blame on yourself. You are not perfect. And it isn't a wonderful and amazing thing that the Lord loves us and the Lord cares for us. And at the end of the day, his relationship with us is not perfection in us. He wants to see maturity in us, but it's not perfection that we are without mistakes. I want you to hear me today that you are God's masterpiece. You are not the masterpiece that is built by the hands of man. You are the masterpiece that was created by the hands and the mouth of God. We have the ability to forgive and release the blame because we remember that though the role of the woman is being removed, the role of the wife is being removed from our life, it does not change the identity of the woman that God created. And yeah, there were some things that you're going to have to make adjustments in. There are things that you've gotten used to that was once a comfort that now you've got to back away from. And that's tough, but you've got to reconcile it. Grieve well so that you can heal well. Release the blame. The blame only keeps us in grief. And I want you to understand that your time to grieve the now loss of that marriage, we all need time. And I'm not on this podcast today talking to you about what time or length your grieving should be, right? I'm not telling you it should be 6 months. I'm not telling you a year. I'm not telling you it should be 2 years. I'm not telling you what your grieving moment is, because for me, when I came out of my divorce, remember what I said, I realized that where the Bible reminds us that it's supposed to be two becoming one, I was like 3/4. I was like a half. So the reality is there was brokenness that was already there. So when I came out of my divorce, divorce was like the final domino tile. And it made me realize that this was just another dysfunctional thing on top of the other dysfunctional things that was already present in my life. So my healing was longer. But I needed to deal with the rape. I needed to deal with the abuse. I needed to deal with the hurt. Like there was more layers of trauma that I needed to heal from. And I made up my mind that I would bring no one else in on my dysfunction. And I wanted. So you may have been that whole woman, and when you're coming out of it, you're having to release the identity of a wife because you're not the wife anymore, and you're having to let that go. But it does not change the wholeness of the identity of the woman that God created you to be. I'm going to say this over and over again throughout these 7 episodes because I want you to hear me. God gives you the identity of a woman. When you are married, your husband shapes the identity of the wife. He has never been designed to give you identity as a woman. Never. And the reality is a lot of the mistakes that we make that makes us so broken, especially when you go through divorce, is when you have placed your identity as a woman in his hand. Never forget that before the woman ever was presented, before she ever was presented to Adam, the Lord built her first. The Lord shaped her first. She spent time in the presence of God. When she was presented to Adam, she was presented whole. You understand me? Which is very different from Adam. The breath of God was already in the rib. The Lord began to shape her. And Mona, when she was presented to Adam, this was a whole woman. He does not shape the identity of you as a woman. He shapes the identity of you as a wife. And the part of our grieving is when that role that was once so one with you, you have to give that back, right? You have to allow it to be broken, right? Not that you won't be a wife again, but you recognize that there are comforts, there's a oneness there that is not there. And you have to be willing to give that to God. That though the wife is there and there are all these lessons that you'll learn, and when you date and when you eventually get married again, you'll be that wife again and you'll be a wiser woman for it. But the reality is that as you are grieving it, it is important that our grief is according to the timing of God. And it is not according to our unwillingness to forgive and release blame. Release the blame from him and from ourselves. Take responsibility. And I want you to hear me today. There is a strong difference between there is a strong difference from accepting blame and accepting responsibility. It's two different things. Because when we hold on to blame normally produces shame, guilt, and condemnation. But when we accept responsibility, we see the part that we played. And we're like, okay, this is something I need to work on. This is something I need to be better at. What I realized more than anything in my marriage was that God had to be my safe place, that God was my hiding place. And any man that I married who ever felt like there was a such thing as a competition between him and God, I could never marry that guy. I could never date that guy. There was a need. I need to be with someone that understands the value of my relationship with God. And I love you, but he's been the one that's been here. And I need to be able to not feel like I'm having to choose between you and God. That's crazy to me, right? But that was the situation I was in. But at the same time, I cannot use church and events and things as my reasoning not to face things, right? When really he deserves that conversation. He deserves to be able to constructively tell me, I don't really like this. And I'm willing to say, you know what, honey, you're right. You're right. I can compromise it. Like that, me compromising there is not a compromising my identity. I got you. That's why our identity cannot be put into people. Because now when they constructively criticize us about something, we take it like a whole world is falling down. Listen, forgive and release the blame so that that other person can move on and live. learn the lessons they need to learn, do what they do, and you can live. And you can learn the lessons by accepting responsibility, but completely walking away from the idea of shame, guilt, and condemnation. Never forget, the Bible declares that therefore there is no condemnation in Christ Jesus. The Bible even declares that Jesus, because of the joy that was set before him, he said he endured the cross and he despised the shame, and he was set on the right hand with the Father's. Shame, condemnation, that ain't of God. It's not of him. Guilt isn't even of God, because really what God desires for us is to repent. Like we know we're guilty, and carrying guilt just says, I know, man, I know I did something wrong, but that's not repentance. You can feel guilty for something, but it doesn't mean that you change, that you turn away from it. So shame, guilt, and condemnation is not of God. So my prayer on today is that you would choose to release it, right? Accept whatever responsibility you need to accept. What are the lessons that you can learn from it, and move forward? Man, I pray that this has been a joy. It has been a joy with me to be able to share this with you. And I pray that you've been enjoying this conversation. Don't forget that if you are enjoying this Built Woman conversation, Heal Well, Wholeness After Divorce, would you mind subscribing to my channel? Like the video. Come on. Don't you mind sharing it with those that you know would benefit from it? I believe that this is going to bless the lives of so many women that hear this conversation, because it's going to go deeper. And I'm so excited for everything that we're going to talk about. So I cannot wait till we have a deeper conversation on next week, talking about healing well, wholeness after divorce. Come on. God bless you guys. I pray that you would have a blessed rest of your week.